The boomer shooter genre was never one that I found incredibly appealing, although that may have been due to being a console gamer for most of my video gaming life. While I was never particularly drawn to games of this genre, when I did engage with them, I always had a great time. Turbo Overkill caught my attention on Steam because it appeared to be a boomer shooter with a particular focus on highlighting the campy violence of the genre's originators, both with its silly name and the intentional inclusion of the game's chainsaw leg in marketing materials, so I decided to check it out. In Turbo Overkill, you play as Johnny Turbo, a street cleaner that's been hired to prevent a rogue AI named Sin from taking over the city of Paradise. Johnny is equipped with multiple cybernetic enhancements, such as a mechanical hand, and most notably the aforementioned chainsaw leg. Turbo Overkill leans into the over-the-top violence that the boomer shooter genre is known for, while also having some level of character building and a serviceable narrative line. Each chapter begins with a short cinematic that sets up the level and occasionally provides some exposition about Johnny's past and personality. Some chapters also have dialogue coming from other characters, such as Sin and a friendly AI named Sam, that progresses the story and directs you toward objectives without interrupting gameplay. In fact, while the story isn't incredibly deep or thought-provoking, it does a great job of not taking itself too seriously or overstaying its welcome in between the whirlwind of action taking place at any given moment. It simultaneously does what it needs to, while also posing interesting questions as the game continues, and I have to commend it for that. The core experience of Turbo Overkill is the campaign, which contains 3 episodes with multiple chapters to clear. There's also a nice throwback inclusion in the form of hidden tech chips and cassettes in each level. These collectibles unlock content in the form of additional gameplay modifiers or secret levels if you spend the time to collect them. Outside of the campaign, there's also an arcade mode where you play through a specific level with a limited number of lives, and an endless mode that places you in an arena to fight waves of enemies. Both of these additional modes have a score system based around killing enemies and collecting accolades by defeating them in specific ways. This score is then calculated and tracked on a leaderboard to create a sense of competition and increase the replay value of the game. Turbo Overkill has a very nice modern retro aesthetic that doesn't prioritize realism and is perfect for the exaggerated violence that's a hallmark of the boomer shooter genre. The visual design also lends itself to having interesting enemy designs and silhouettes because the slightly pixelated abstract art style means it's easier to have outlandish designs that are still believable at first glance. The pacing in Turbo Overkill is also very well executed, typically introducing something new in each chapter or escalating the stakes in a way that feels organic to the story being told. There are other visible attributes of good design, such as how the placement of ammunition throughout a level subtly encourages and reminds the player to use specific weapons. Even though enemies don't drop ammo, I rarely ran into situations where I was getting low on ammunition because the pickups around the level were reminding me of the other weapons, or made sure I always had ammo on weapons I wasn't using. The combat in Turbo Overkill is the main focus, and it successfully delivers on the chaotic experience coined in the games it draws inspiration from, like classic Doom and Duke Nukem. As you play the game, you collect more weapons for your one-man arsenal and cybernetic augmentations that add traversal mechanics or act as upgrades to your existing loadout. While defeating enemies, you collect currency called Zen that can be spent at various vending machines spread around levels to purchase augmentations or weapon upgrades to unlock the secondary firing modes for each new weapon. You also move very quickly, another staple in the genre, and the level design accounts for that speed. Environments are often larger in scale and spread out so that it never feels cramped, often including slopes to encourage the player to use their chainsaw leg. Activating your chainsaw leg causes Johnny to slide with the chainsaw forward to eviscerate enemies, and a higher travel speed means higher damage dealt. In situations where they do appear, narrow paths lend themselves perfectly to using Johnny's chainsaw leg, and often will include lower health enemies to tear through, making the act of walking down a corridor more engaging and simultaneously elevating the action of the game. There are also augments that can be added to gain health and armor when defeating enemies with the chainsaw leg, reminding the player to use it and providing opportunities to heal between engagements. While Turbo Overkill is exceptionally well designed, there were a few things that I would have liked to see that I think could have improved the experience that I personally had. For one, there's a lack of a clear visual indicator when shooting enemies, or indications of the amount of damage they're taking. Enemies will simply die when they've taken enough damage, which I believe is intentional given the loading screen tooltip that states, "shoot until they die." You do get used to it, but early in the game it's unclear how much damage you're dealing when the only indication of that damage is whether or not the enemy's dead. There are settings that can be enabled, such as showing damage numbers or hit markers, but they add clutter to the UI and can be hard to see through the muzzle flashes of some of the weapons. There are hit sparks when you hit the environment, and an argument could be made that having the opposite for enemies does communicate that you're hitting them, but I still think the inclusion of blood effects or hit sparks on enemies would have been effective in reassuring the player that they are indeed hitting their target. Another small complaint that I have, which admittedly is more of a skill issue, is that I tend to struggle to remember all of the tools in my toolkit the longer the game continues. By the time I was halfway through the second episode, you have about 8 total weapons and abilities that are available to you that I was frequently forgetting about. It's not that I didn't want to use the other weapons or attacks, but it's much easier to stick to the same few weapons while mowing down enemies and dodging curtains of bullets than it is to constantly be thinking and switching to a more optimal weapon. As you continue to collect weapons, it also became more of a challenge to quickly get to the weapons that I wanted, and would often fumble around in higher damage, slow firing weapons while trying to get to the weapons with a higher fire rate. This feeling can be mitigated by using the selection wheel that slows time when you select your weapon, but personally I don't find it as engaging as swapping on the fly. So again, it's more of a skill issue than a complaint. But as far as complaints go, that's all I can really bring myself to mention in Turbo Overkill. It's an exceptionally fun title that focuses on the strengths of the boomer shooter genre and delivers an engaging narrative in between the chaotic melee of limbs, blood, and cybernetic monstrosities. If you're a fan of boomer shooters, this is an easy game to recommend. Thanks for watching, take care, and remember, keep having fun.